Hi class, it's Bill Berry back with another video series, Programming with Choices, for our Intro to Programming with JavaScript class. So far our scripts have been pretty straightforward. We've written a series of statements and they have executed, but life gets pretty limiting when that's all you can do. So we're going to be adding to our toolbox some more of the fundamental tools that let us address more realistic scenarios, writing scripts that are a little more exciting and a little more useful in real life. So let's jump in and look at that. This week we're going to talk about flow of control. How does program control, how do program statements execute and in which order? We have already used one that we haven't really talked about, and that is if we put statements one after another, we know they're going to execute one after another. But that's not enough. There are a lot of times when we need to control special cases, and we need to say, there are a bunch of different scenarios we need to handle depending on what we see, the data. So we're going to learn about that. And we're going to talk about sequence, selection, and iteration. Then we're going to investigate more specifically the kinds of statements that you use in the language in order to accomplish that, right? In order to implement those things. Now, by the way, these are very similar to what you're going to see in other languages. So if you learn to write these statements in JavaScript, you will be fine writing them in Java or C. And in fact, other languages are going to have very similar constructs, right? The syntax may be slightly different, but these are kind of a universal concept. We're also going to explore a little bit about mutual exclusivity. We need to make sure that we understand the case, that often we're programming cases where one and only one of the scenarios needs to get executed. So we're going to look at how that will work. And then we're going to revisit our idea of comparison operators and how to write more complex conditions, because we haven't used those yet and they didn't really make sense too much when we introduced them. So we'll look at that. Then, to cap it all off, we'll look at selection and how to use it in form validation. So we'll talk about how we can add if statements, selection statements, so that our forms can really come to life a lot more and we can control what the user does and say, hey, you forgot to do this, you didn't enter something in a valid range, etc. So that'll be that'll feel very realistic, and that'll be a sense of accomplishment there. All right, so first of all, flow of control. What does it mean to do that? What does it mean to execute statements in order and etc.? So first let's talk about the statements, the ideas here. So we need to make sure that we can control as programmers what order things are going to execute in. By default, it's always going to run in sequence. So if you write 5 statements, it's going to execute them top to bottom, statement 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? We've used that before, and that's just something we rely on, right? They're going to automatically go in order. But sometimes we need to make that different. Now, we don't do that arbitrarily. We don't just jump around in the code and write statements that just sort of willy-nilly go here and there. There always are orderly ways to do this, right? And when we write in our programs, we want to do these in orderly fashion. So we're going to look at ways to do that, and we're going to control the flow of control. We can control where the program goes by using selection, which is choices in code based on data, and looping or iteration, which will control running things multiple times until a specific condition is reached. And those will all make sense once we get there. So let's jump in and let's talk about some real life analogies, and we'll get closer and closer to code, and then we'll write some code together. So the analogies are, let's say you're walking along Alki Beach with your friend. Sometimes you just walk, right? You're just walking, putting one foot in front of the other. There's nothing particular going on. You're just sort of walking and chatting. That's an example of sequence, right? You just keep going. So that's pretty easy. But there's some other cases where you might alter that a little bit. For instance, this owner down here, let's say this dog owner is not very conscientious, not very responsible, and her dog poops on the path. She doesn't have a bag, so she walks on, or maybe she goes to get a bag, I don't know. But you're walking along and you see that dog poop and you would walk into it, right? You would walk and step in that dog poop. You don't want to do that, right? You're not going to continue in your normal sequence in this case, because you have some data that you're going to act on, and based on that data, you're going to step around the dog path. So notice you altered your path. You flowed, your steps flowed a different way based on the data that you have available. That's called selection. All right. Now here's another example for iteration. Let's say that there's a coffee shop at a certain point along the beach walk there that you want to stop at. This would be an example of iteration because you're going to walk until you reach the coffee shop, right? You're going to continue but as soon as you reach that, your steps are going to stop, right? It's that you're getting there is the whole goal. So these are real-life analogies so that you can understand what's going on. Again, we're going to look at more specific analogies and get more and more specific until we write code for these things. So the first thing we're going to look at is working with a very simple if statement. And the if statement, again, very common. This is going to be the same in many languages, and the syntax is the same as Java, the same as C that we're going to look at here. You're going to write code for a special case if we're just using a very simple if. All right, so let's look at an analogy for that. Again, we're going to get more and more specific and then write some code. So let's say your son comes in and says, I need some money. I need to make some money. Can I do a chore? And you look in the kitchen and say, wow, there's a big pile of dishes that are there from dinner and I'm not excited about doing it. If you do those dishes, you wash and dry and put away all those dishes, I'll give you $5. It's worth that. So what does your son interpret from all of that? First, if he does that chore, he gets the $5. But also implied in that statement, even without you saying it, if he doesn't do the chore, then obviously no action is needed on your part. You don't go to your wallet, you don't worry about it. You just, if you see the pile of dishes still there and the son hasn't done the work, then everything goes on as before. All right. So this is a special case. If he does the dishes, $5. Right? So that's the analogy for the if. All right, so let's get a little more businessy and then we'll write some code to support it. All right, so next, let's say that we have this business scenario. You calculate the commission for a salesman, but if they sell more than $1 million, let's say it's a yearly sales or something, whatever, then their commission goes up by 10%, right? It grows by 10% if their sales reaches this value. Note if it's greater than 1 million. All right, so how do we do that? Well, let's look at how we would describe it first in a flowchart. So I didn't put the start and end little capsule shaped things, but that's okay. We're starting at the top, set commission to 2%. Then here's a little input block. We're going to ask the user to input the sales. Then we're going to calculate the commission by taking the sales and multiplying it by the commission rate. That makes sense. Now something new. We have a diamond-shaped symbol, and that is a decision, right? And the decision is sales greater than 1 million? And then we follow the answer. If yes, if the answer is yes to that decision, that question, then we have to do something special. We have code that sets the commission to commission times 110%, right? You make commission 110% of what it was before. But if in the other case, if it wasn't, then you do nothing, right? You do nothing special at all. In fact, in either case, you come back to this point and then you display the sales and commission. This is the special case code that we want to code up, right? And that's what we're going to use an if statement for. You can write the same thing in pseudocode and it looks like this. The only difference here is, notice that I say if the sales is greater than 1 million, then, and then I indent, maybe I indent to show that these are all the things that are part of the special case. In this case, it's just one statement, right? It could be multiple of them, but in this case, we only have one. So I indent only this one statement, and then once we get outdented, right, once we're back to the normal indentation, we know, oh, that's the end of that special case. Now we go on with business, right? Does that make sense? All right, so let's look specifically at what you do to construct an if statement, and then let's go write that scenario in code. All right, so the structure of an if statement looks just like this. Again, in JavaScript, Java, C, same thing. You write the word if, lowercase if. You follow that by a condition, and that condition must be in parentheses. So you often use something like a variable compared to a literal, a variable compared to another variable, whatever you need to do to make a condition, and a condition is something that yields true or false, right? So either the age is less than 21 or it's not, right? It yields true or false. After that, you put curly braces, and inside the curly braces you write one or more statements that you wish to have executed. All right, so in this case, we're going to just write one statement which says no booze for this person because they're under 21. You can put multiple statements in there, but you should always use the curly braces. There are some cases where they're not specifically required, but I don't want you to think about that. I want you to always use the curly braces because you'll get in trouble if you don't. There's a reason why we use them always. So that's how an if statement looks. So now let's go and find our sample code and let's go take care of this and actually write something. So let me get out of the slides real quick. and then we'll take our starter and we'll copy it and we'll put it here and call it if demo. All right, then I'm going to open my code in Notepad so that I start with this, and I'm going to get rid of my hello world. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to follow my flowchart or my pseudocode, and then we're going to see what we need to do with that. So the first thing I need to do is create a variable for commission rate. And I'm going to put 0.02 in it, 2%, right? Now, you might say, well, why don't I just use the 0.02 later in the calculation? Well, you could, but by putting this at the top, we kind of see it more quickly, so if we need to change that commission rate, it'll be a little more obvious where it is. Now, I'm going to get a variable for sales, and I'm going to send it, assign it to the result of a prompt, and that prompt is going to say enter yearly sales. And then I don't have a default, right? There's no way for me to guess. Now, the other thing I probably want to do is I probably want to turn that into a number, right? Because I'm going to do some math on it later. So I want to make sure that I have that turned to a number so it's ready for me to calculate on. Great. Now I'm going to calculate the commission. So I need to make another variable called commission, and I'm going to set it equal to sales times commission rate. Notice I can just choose it. If you're not careful, you'll type these things wrong, so I highly recommend that you either use the autocomplete or that you copy and paste these things, because if you make one tiny mistake, it's not going to work and you're going to get frustrated. So make sure you're consistent. All right, so now at some point we're going to show the results. So we could actually write the code this way. Commission equals $, and then I'm going to put a plus, and I'm going to concatenate on commission. Always develop your code iteratively, right? Write one piece that works. In this case, we just write the plain simple case without the special case, and we're going to make sure it actually works before we bother moving forward. So I'm going to run this, enter yearly sales. I'm going to put in $100,000, and what should our commission be? Commission is $2,000, right? That sounds about right. So make sure that your code works in the simple case before you worry about the code in the special case. All right, so I'm going to minimize that. All right, now where does our if statement need to be? It needs to be between here and here because it's the special case after the commission is calculated, but before it is displayed or alerted to the user. So we know our if statements have to go in here. All right, so what does an if statement look like? If you're a clever coder, you always start this way. If you automatically put the parentheses and you automatically put the curly braces, right? Just do that by default, right? Always do it that way because then you won't forget some piece of it. Okay, so now what is our condition? In our case, we want to say if sales is greater than, and now we want to put the $1 million. We could put that up at the top too. That might not be a bad idea. 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There's our $1 million. So if sales is greater than $1 million, and then inside the curly braces, we write any code that we need to run in that special case. And that happens to be commission tab equals commission tab, right? I'm just using autocomplete times 1.1. We could put that up at the top too, right? That anything that looks like, these kind of numbers, that would be great to put at the top. We're going to not do it for now, but there you go. All right, so this says, look, if sales is greater than $1 million, then add to the commission, right? Add 10% on top of it. If it's not, then we don't do that, right? We don't do these lines of code, and we just come down here. Either way, once we get to this point after this curly brace, we know that commission has been calculated, and either it's been added to or it hasn't. Doesn't make any difference, right? We've taken care of both cases by the fact that the if covers the special case. Now, let's go take a look at that and let's go run it. Do I have it open still? Yes, I do. So I'll just go and refresh. And now I'm going to put in sales more than that. I'm going to put in 2 million. And let's see what that is, right? And that seems right because it would have been 40,000, but now it's 44,000, right? So that seems right. So that's an example of an if statement working in logic, and you've written that logic into your code and it works in this case, and that's great. So that covers what we need to do with simple if statements to cover special conditions, right? Now, we're going to continue with another video which talks about some other things that you can do with an if statement, right? Because there's some other things, some other cases that are a little bit more complex, tiny bit, not much, that we might need to handle. There's more scenarios that we need to cover. And if so, we need to learn some alternatives, but we'll cover that in the next video. So continue there, and thanks for watching this one.